Hello, I'm Dr. Holly Daniels, coming to you from Sober College Studios in Los Angeles, California, and this is a mental health moment. If you've ever gone to therapy or know someone who has, you may have heard the word boundaries or heard people talking about how their boundaries have been disrespected or talking about people who are codependent or have no boundaries. It's definitely a bit of a pop psychology buzzword these days, but it's actually a super important concept when it comes to mental health and well-being. So today we're going to talk a little bit about this concept of boundaries. Personal boundaries are the physical, emotional, and mental limits that we need to establish for ourselves in order to identify the safe and permissible ways in which we allow others to interact with us. We use boundaries to both protect ourselves from being manipulated or intruded upon, and also to let others in to our private emotional space in ways that feel healthy, supportive, and good. So boundaries are not just about keeping others at bay. Healthy boundaries are important for letting people in as well, having healthy, authentic, reciprocal relationships. So healthy boundaries are firm but permeable, meaning you know yourself well, you know where your emotional, physical, and mental self ends and the other begins, and you can keep the boundary firm in order to protect yourself from unwanted advances emotionally, physically, or mentally, but you can also decide when to let people in when you've deemed them trustworthy and you want to enjoy the perks of relationship. And here I'm talking about all relationships, not just romantic relationships. So how do boundaries form in the first place? And why do some people have healthy boundaries and others do not? Well, it happens when you're a wee bairn and you're growing up. You learn from your mother in particular, but from all of your family of origin members, what healthy boundaries are. And the process of learning how to create healthy boundaries is not really an easy one because we're all born in a very enmeshed, unboundaried state. So when we're first born, we're purposefully entwined with our mothers and our other parents, emotionally, physically, and mentally, because we're so dependent on our parents in those first years, and we need to be enmeshed. So it's actually healthy not to have good boundaries when we're infants. But when we grow in our teenage years and then into our young adulthood, we need to begin to differentiate who we are in relation to our parents and others in the world and form our own personal boundaries. It's a process that we call individuation. So if we don't make the shift from childhood enmeshment to adult individuation, we never become fully able to take care of ourselves and have healthy, reciprocal, intimate relationships. So how do we learn to go from totally enmeshed and entwined to fully individuated and boundaried? Well, it's complicated, right? Especially for us humans anyway. In the animal kingdom, the process is a little easier and it's fast and discreet. A young animal is born and they're fully enmeshed with the mother, but then when the young one is deemed ready by instinct, the young one says goodbye to mom and goes on their separate way and creates their own independent life. But humans don't quite work that way. We're more complex. We have to not only learn how to establish our physical boundaries as we mature, which we also do. We've also seen the sign on the teenager's door, right, that says, keep out, this is my space. But we humans have to also establish mental and emotional boundaries with one another, which is a much more complex and non-linear process. And because this process of learning healthy boundaries is complex, nonlinear, and experiential, meaning we have to experience it in order to really learn it. You need parents who have these firm but permeable boundaries who can both differentiate your emotional experience from theirs and still be vulnerable enough to let you in when you need support and comfort. What does that look like exactly? Let's use an example to illustrate. So say, for example, we have a parent who is at home watching Grey's Anatomy on the couch, and their 16-year-old is out at the high school dance. Now, the 16-year-old comes home early and is crying and upset because someone was mean to them at the dance. They ended up crying in front of everybody, and now they're embarrassed and angry and sad, and they can't stop crying. This is where the healthy, boundaried parent takes a breath and recognizes that the hurt of their child is not their own hurt, right? And this way the parent can stay calm, be the support person for the child, express to the child that they're very sorry that this happened at the dance, and they're here to give them a hug and talk it out, right? But the parent isn't crying and visibly upset too at this time. Nobody was actually mean to the parent. The parent was home watching Grey's Anatomy. So the parent has this firm emotional boundary, but simultaneously it's a permeable boundary, and they let their child into their emotional space in order to be comforted, right, and supported. So, of course, the parent would be feeling some sadness of their own too. We'd never like to see our loved ones hurting, but the parent isn't experiencing the 16-year-old's hurt as if it was their very own emotional wound, right? And not only is the parent better able to comfort at that time, but the parent is showing the 16-year-old and modeling for them what healthy boundaries look and feel like. I can be here for you in your pain and know that it's not my pain, so I'm okay, but I can also let you in and be here to support and love you and give you a hug, modeling those healthy boundaries. Now let's say the 16-year-old comes home and the parent has unhealthy boundaries that maybe are too permeable. The parent and child are a little enmeshed, we would say. So the parent sees the child crying and feeling sad and angry, and because the parent's boundaries are too permeable, the parent actually experiences the child's emotions as their very own. And the parent is suddenly also very angry and crying and not feeling very stable, and says something like, let's get into the car and drive back to school together and give those people a piece of our minds. Or the parent might say, oh, my poor thing, this is way too much pain. I can feel how painful it is. This is so crazy. You can just take the whole next week off of school, or you never have to go back to school again because this is too much for you. So the parent is now sucked into the 16-year-old's emotional experience, and they can't be there to parent and be calm and helpful. And not only does this make the present situation worse for the child and the parent, but the 16-year-old does not learn what it feels like to be able to incorporate this experience of being with somebody with a healthy emotional boundary. Now, let's say on the other end of the spectrum that the 16-year-old comes home to a parent whose boundaries are too firm. They're more like a wall than a boundary, right? And you can kind of imagine what this scenario would look like. The 16-year-old comes home and is crying and angry and upset, maybe throws their shoes on the floor, and the parent looks over, reluctantly turns off the TV and says, "What's wrong with you?" Right? And then even if the child is brave enough in that moment to tell the parent what happened at the dance, the parent says, "Oh, get over it, you'll be fine. Oh my gosh, these aren't really troubles. You should see the troubles I had when I was a kid. You have it so easy, you have nothing to complain about." And the parent turns the TV back on, and the child is now sadder and angrier and probably feeling a lot of shame too, and doesn't have the experience of those healthy boundaries either. So from both of these unhealthy scenarios, what can happen in reaction to a parent with these unhealthy boundaries is that the child becomes either afraid to show any emotion, afraid of experiencing their own emotions because they don't want to be emotionally absorbed or overtaken by the enmeshed parent, or rejected by the avoidant parent. And so the child tries to stuff all emotions away, right? Or the child can become super emotional in order to try to get him or herself heard above the parent's dysfunction. So in either case, these emotions become very difficult for the child to tolerate. And as we know, those who are brought up with unhealthy boundaries and cannot tolerate emotions may turn to drugs and alcohol, or unhealthy relationship behaviors, or eating disorders in order to deal with their emotional discomfort. So, what if you grew up in a family system that through no fault of its own did not model healthy boundaries, right? Or maybe you even had healthy boundaries but then had a traumatic experience that disturbed your healthy boundaries. That can also happen. Whatever the reason, let's say you've come to a place in your adult life where you realize you do not have the healthiest of boundaries. Well, I have good news. All is not lost. You can teach yourself healthy boundaries as an adult. Now, you may very well need the help of a professional to do this, but it can be done. I've seen it happen many times, and I would suggest that you find a good local therapist and talk with them about what issues you have in relationships and what you would like your relationships to look and feel like. And if you're interested in more on this topic, tune into our Mental Health Moment segment on creating secure attachments, which talks about what you need to do in order to begin to practice healthy boundaries in relationship. I hope this helped with your understanding of boundaries and what it means to have healthy boundaries in relationships. As always, we'd love to hear your questions and comments, so please send us an email to the address on the screen. I'm Dr. Holly Daniels, wishing you all health and happiness.